I am Jeff Ado. This is Lunacy, where we discern the sacred from the insane and admit that whether we like it or not, we are all profoundly affected by the cycles of the moon. Ow! Nice. My guest today is Jade Michael. She has a master's in psychology. She's a public speaker, and she is the channel for the Neuro-Sovereignty codex, which we're going to get into, which sounds crazy cool and weird, and I'm into it. So, Jade, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jeff. It's an honor to be here, brother. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So, you're on because, you met my wife, Christine, at a Mary Magdalene retreat. Um, which I actually kind of maybe we should just start there because I think that's really interesting. Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, as everybody knows, and that's the truth. And just kidding. Um,
Oh, it hurt.
it hurt. Yeah, it
It
hurts to
hurt to
hear that.
hear.
It's so interesting. I was thinking about that before we came on the program because there's a lot more information about Mary Magdalene these days, and there's a whole
Mhm.
gospel about her that was discovered more recently, and just sort of a lot of the how do we want to say it, bullshit, okay, about
Mhm.
her has been debunked, and that she was not a prostitute, and really even the idea of that is just kind of another way that men dominate women, in the
Mhm.
good old story, the perfect dude, Jesus Christ, was hanging out with a prostitute because he was, that whole thing just irks. It irks.
It
So
irks. It does. It does irk.
yeah, and I don't buy that for a second. So yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind, just starting there. Um, Christine and you and a bunch of other friends of mine actually went to this Mary Magdalene retreat, and it was really getting deeper into what Mary Magdalene has to offer as a teacher and like that. And I'd love for you to just maybe speak a little bit about what you got there and kind of how that influences who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, working with Christ consciousness in general is very central to my work and is a foundational pillar of the Neuro-Sovereignty Codex itself. And so I have two very sacred, incredible, intelligent, powerful sisters named Roxanne Ruby and Rose Heartsong. And they're really stewarding this mission to bring forward Mary Magdalene's story forward in a way that reclaims her power and really establishes her as the female face of Christ, to invite the female face of God back onto her throne so we can come into this balance of masculine and feminine energy. And so the retreat we were at was called Watchtower because Magdalene, Migdal means watchtower, the watcher of the flock.
Hmm.
And we came together for, I think it was 41 or 42 women for like 4 days of ritual and prayer in dedication to Mary Magdalene, the female Christ. And it was one of the most beautiful and profound experiences of my life because the way that Christ consciousness works is it's really an energy that moves through you, right?
Hmm.
It's we are vessels, we are conduits for Christ consciousness, for Christ energy. And so inviting the Christ consciousness of Mary Magdalene to come forward through a group of so many women was such a profoundly impactful and beautiful experience. And they're they're really working on launching this film project where we are planning on traveling to different sacred sites like Egypt and France, where Mary Magdalene lived and worshiped, and her path of devotion runs through. And
Hmm.
so Watchtower was really step one on this bigger mission to be able to document and tell the story of Mary Magdalene.
Cool. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, so just in case we pissed off all the Christians, I actually, it's really actually not outside of what fundamental Christianity has to say, live with a heart of compassion, and really that,
Mhm.
we can all have this level of consciousness that is, Christ-like or is enlightened, if you will, or that he was a teacher, and certainly from a mystical perspective, it's so many of the teachings of Jesus really are all about that we can all ascend to a level of not suffering and really being recognizing our interconnectedness and seeing the shared heart that
Mhm.
we all have and reconnecting that way. So
100%. And working with Mary Magdalene is kind of it's this twofold stand because it was the most ingenious business move of all time when the Romans were like, hey, we want to conquer all of this land, but this is going to be extraordinarily expensive. How are we going to fund this mission? Oh, let's come into collaboration with a church. How about the Roman Catholic Church? This is genius because if we tell people they want access to God, and they have to go through all of our holy men to access God. But in order to access our holy men, they're going to have to give us their money. Then we're going to make a bunch of money. And it was wildly successful. And in doing so, they effectively placed God outside of the human being. They placed God in the sky as this
Sky Daddy.
sky daddy, right? And I was just listening to one of Alan Watts's speech, and he talks about how this the Christian concept of God that won out over time is this white, beneficent, tyrannical entity,
Yeah.
right? That sits up in the sky and is keeping score and taking tabs, and it's this hellfire and brimstone concept of God, which is the opposite of God being love.
Yeah.
And effectively, this placed God outside of the
Hmm.
self. So we only have this concept of God outside of the being. And the books that made it into the Old Testament, into the canon, were all of the texts that talked about God being male and God being outside of the self. So it completely erased the truth of the God within and also the female face of God, which we know now with having access to the Book of Mary, that there is more to this story, right? And
Hmm.
not only was Mary Christ's closest companion, but one of the apostles that after Christ passed, the other apostles turned to and asked her for the teachings that he shared with her personally to come
Hmm.
forward because they had such an established and profound relationship.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, the term Sky Daddy comes from Rainn Wilson's book, Soul Boom,
Soul
which is
boom.
really great. Yeah, he's Dwight from The Office. So
Oh,
yeah, he's really, really great. Really
oh,
interesting
now I'm
guy.
super interested.
Yeah, somebody I'm hoping to get on this program at some point. But yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's really great. And it's really beautiful what you have to share about that. And I mean, it also, when you look at it from that perspective, it aligns so much more with the other, more popular religious traditions of our time that are really, I guess, standing the test of time, like Buddhism and Sufism, and
Mhm.
that have both of those, like where the God is within you, and also acknowledging the goddess within you and the goddess everywhere, and that energy. So that's really beautiful that you're looking at that, and I know I'm super intrigued to learn more about that entire process and what Mary has to teach us.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
Me too. I'm excited to learn more also
yeah.
as we continue tracing her footsteps and hearing her voice and her lineage really unfold as we walk this path.
Hmm. Yeah. And you already kind of mentioned, like, and this for sure falls into your work. You're really about having the divine feminine rise and the divine masculine rise in us, to recognize those components of each of those in ourselves. And I
Mhm.
think it's important to recognize that um there's a distinction. I feel like when we get into these waters, um the backlash of so many years of male dominated society and culture, and even like just sort of echoes even within my veins, from my own ancestry is like, well, what are you saying? You're saying that women are better than men. That's what you're saying, but that's not at all
Mm.
what this is about. This is really about the equality of creation and that one does not exist without the other. And how do we honor both? And how
Mhm.
do we correct our course so that we're really living in harmony with each other and the planet and
Yeah, it's
less
all
in
balance.
fear and greed? Yeah. So
Mm.
let's just make that clear from the get go. This is about equality and honor rather than, putting one gender in front of the other. We tried that. Didn't
100%. It's
work.
synergy and symbiosis.
Exactly. So yeah, first of all, let's start off with just a brief history of Jade Michael. I know, and you can that's probably a long story, but you could just give us a little history of like where you grew up, what your education was, and then what got you into the whole concept of neuro-sovereignty and creating that codex, that system for people.
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay. Mormon?
Not Mormon. I was waiting for that question. I knew it would
Okay.
come.
Yeah, yeah.
No, not Mormon. I definitely have a lot of Mormon ancestry, but the generations above me were not LDS, at least on my mom's side, so I was not raised Mormon. And yeah, I went to middle school, high school, and my undergrad in Salt Lake City. So I went to the University of Utah and studied chemistry. And I had such a profound time studying chemistry because though the one thing I knew after I graduated was that I did not want to wear a white lab coat for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I also came so much closer to God, to the all in this course of study.
Hmm.
And it really inspired this idea within me that as computers are written in binary zeros and ones, life as we know it seems to be built out of a self-learning and evolving code made out of subatomic particles that come together and create everything on the periodic table and then how all of those elements interact with one another.
Hmm.
And so I was really inspired by that, which really ties into this idea of the cosmoerotic vision of the universe, where everything is about attraction and repulsion and this great love story of moving away and coming back together and the attractive force that really underlies existence as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
And so around this time, I also found the Kabbalion, which is the probably the most popular Hermetic text. I actually have it right here. It's always
Oh
within
yeah.
like 3 to 4 feet of my body.
Okay. Cool.
And it outlines the seven Hermetic principles. And
And
I
for those
never
of us who don't know, the Kabbalion, is that related to Kabbalah or is that a different thing?
So they are different things. They have a common ancestry. And
Okay.
so the Kabbalion is the distilled work essentially of Hermes Trismegistus. And for
Oh.
those who aren't familiar with Hermes Trismegistus, it's Trismegistus as in tri, the thrice great. And he or they were known as the master of masters that dwelt in ancient Egypt, lived for over 300 years, this very mythological figure that's connected to Thoth or Tehuti, Jehuti, who is the messenger of the gods in the Egyptian pantheon, and Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods in the Greek pantheon.
Hmm.
And Hermes Trismegistus is really credited as being the author of the Emerald Tablets and the Corpus Hermeticum. So, really, all of the texts that fit into occult wisdom and esotericism. Hermes Trismegistus is kind of like our esoteric forefather.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. And then the Kabbalion was published, I believe, in 1908 by the three initiates, who is probably the pen name for a man named William Walker Atkinson. Potentially, we don't have confirmation on that, but that's one of the leading theories. But it essentially outlines the seven Hermetic principles, which are the foundational principles that a lot of occult wisdom builds on top of. And the cool thing about the seven Hermetic principles is that they have been validated by science
Oh,
in
wow.
so many different ways. And that's what really drew me to Hermeticism, was having this background in chemistry and then finding this spiritually organized life philosophy and how they seem to seamlessly and beautifully embed with one another.
Hmm.
And then I decided to get a master's in experimental psychology. Really, I didn't decide. I was sitting there meditating one day during COVID. I was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do with my life? Like, God, please give me a sign. And I just heard like the clearest message I've ever received, and it was just get a PhD in psychology. And so in that moment, my life completely shifted course. I started working on a PhD in psychology in Montana and started to realize how much I was learning in cognitive psychology also mapped onto the seven Hermetic principles.
Hmm.
And there's a whole other thread that I'll tie into this story, just to quickly note that I spent 15 years of my life completely dysregulated by obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
And the Western medical model really led me to believe that this was a chronic condition that I would have for the rest of my life. And
Hmm.
there was no cure, and they could treat symptoms, but it was like, I'm Jade and I am OCD. And I
Yeah.
wore it like this scarf on my body for many years because I was completely disempowered by the ideological structure that I subscribed to, which was the Western medical model.
Hmm.
And then I found meditation and Hermetic wisdom, which completely shifted my worldview to becoming aware that God was not just this thing outside of me, God also exists within me.
Hmm.
And through strengthening the I mind, the masculine mind, which is attention, which is awareness, which is judgment, through meditation and then finding the empowering message of Hermetic wisdom that told me that my mind was capable of shifting the reality inside of me and outside of me, I effectively rewired my neural circuitry and overcame OCD in about 3 to 4 years.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so
And were you on drugs before that for OCD or?
I was briefly on Zoloft. I
Okay.
was briefly on Zoloft, but what Zoloft taught me was that feeling like you're going to have a panic attack 12 hours of the day is actually more enjoyable than feeling completely apathetic.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I was very short-lived with taking Zoloft, and I had so many psychiatrists and psychologists tell me you need to be on medication, you need to be medicated, and I'm not against medication by any means. I think there are times when that's a tool in the toolbox that is accessible and can bring a lot of healing. But I think we should be looking at it from the perspective of mental illness is really a rite of passage that
Hmm.
we're meant to overcome. And we
Yeah.
can use these pharmaceuticals to help in that process of overcoming if it's helpful, but not as something that's meant to be a band-aid that suppresses the symptoms just enough that we aren't inspired to look deeper and find out what the root cause is.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's really beautiful. What you did was you started looking deeper into your own self and started to see through meditation
Mhm.
that this is something that you could actually rewire in your own mind if you just looked deeper. And then it also sounds like within that process, you started looking at the OCD as teaching you something, as if there
Mhm.
was a big lesson to be learned here. And so instead of living, if you will, as a victim of this, quote unquote disease, you started looking at it as like, what does this have to teach me? And how is it that I can rewire myself so that it's not something that is haunting me so viciously? Uh,
Mhm.
that's really beautiful. And, I think, we live in a culture that, and by the way, I'm not, I'm not demonizing the culture because of this. It really makes sense. The path of least resistance is a real thing. And so like we do live in a culture where we're just trying to fix it as quickly as possible and just feel good as quickly as possible and not look any deeper than we have to, but at what cost? Even your own testimony talking about, well, I was on Zoloft, but the effect was I was like, I'd rather be completely freaked out all day than just completely apathetic and like a jellyfish floating around. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't use a jellyfish analogy, all right? I just threw that in there, you know what I mean? Because I'm good like that. Jellyfish, I think, are very apathetic. They just float and eat shit. All right.
Yeah, I'm actually quite curious about the emotional life of a jellyfish.
Yeah, this can't
Emotional
be
life
much,
question mark.
right? Maybe, who knows, man? Maybe they're full of love, and
Maybe they're full of ecstasy.
who knows? They could be.
Yeah, not me. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
curious.
But any case, for the sake of the analogy, like, you were really like living a life that was very unrewarding and unfulfilled because also you were influenced by this drug. And so quickly we want to look to those
Hmm.
remedies, and also they're propped up by our economy because they make money, and the more drugs you take, the more money you're spending on the drugs, and
Hmm. Oh yeah.
which also contributes to ultimately a paradigm of powerlessness among the people, which we could get into that a little bit too, which I think feeds
Hmm.
into your whole path of neuro-sovereignty. Um, you know,
Hmm.
I we're gonna get in trouble. Whatever. I don't give a shit. I have a theory that a suppressed population is much more easily controlled. Not just my theory. A lot of people have that theory. And one of the ways that we suppress ourselves or suppress the people or whatever, however you want to look at it, because ultimately we're responsible for our own paradigms, right? Is this idea of the paradigm of powerlessness, that there's nothing I can do about this, or like your psychiatrists all saying to you the only way out is for you to be on drugs, for you to be medicated. And
Hmm.
what's fascinating to me is like you pierced through that veil and said, no, there's something I could do about this. And you really listened to your inner heart through meditation to discover like a more powerful voice. And that's
Hmm.
really what this program is all about, is how do we get more aligned with that more powerful voice that is not on the surface, that is down deep in our hearts. So
Hmm.
so that's great. So we're on this journey. We've got OCD. We're flipping out, taking Zoloft. You know what I mean? Unhappy. Uh, you get a message like, no, 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 meditate. You can really reprogram yourself. You start studying Hermetic principles of the occult. Which anytime anybody says occult, I picture Satan. You know what I mean? Which is not. That's not what occult means.
That's not
Right?
it.
Uh, it's more like ancient wisdom, right? How do you define a cult?
A cult is like esoteric
Yeah. Okay.
wisdom.
Right.
And if we think about hermetic, we think about the hermetic seal. If something's hermetically sealed, you're not getting in, nothing's
Right.
getting out. And
Mm,
so they're deeply sacred teachings that were passed through secret societies and really exclusive lineages for a long time.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great.
And
So,
it's knowledge that you really have to seek out. The hermetic seal is secret, but it's also hermetic in terms of the hermit. It
hmm
is a path of really turning inward. It's a path of deep contemplation.
hmm
And so, in that way, these things are esoteric, they're occult because A, not everyone had access to this information for a very long time, but also because it's a deep practice of discipline and contemplation, it wasn't of interest to a lot
hmm
of people to really bear the fruits that come from the hermetic trees. You have to grow the tree and farm the land and water and be deeply committed. It's a deep path of study, it's a deep path of devotion. And so, in that way, it's not for everybody.
right. Yeah, absolutely. But you discovered it as a kind of a path forward in terms of your own mental health and stability. And so you started
Hmm.
diving deeper into this wisdom, you found the Kabbalion, and then you were studying, and you're seeing how all that interrelates in terms of the psychological principles with the Hermetic principles. And then
Hmm.
and then how did that bring you to where you are now doing the offerings that you're doing?
Yeah, so I went through this incredible process a little over a year ago. It started about a year and a half ago, where I was working with my teacher that I live with here in Los Angeles, Luna Lua. She does these beautiful cannabis ceremonies. And before working with her, I had a challenging relationship with cannabis because she would make me feel so paranoid.
Hmm.
And Lua helped me understand that cannabis is the medicine of the mother. It's mother medicine, and the feminine mind is the subconscious mind. And so, what cannabis does is illuminate things that are present in the subconscious and brings them conscious. So, if she's making you paranoid, she's not making you paranoid out of nowhere. She's making you aware of things in the system that need to be looked at, that need to be reconciled, that need to be worked through. There's some sort of fear or unintegrated trauma that's present. And so that's kind of tangential, but she totally helped me restructure my relationship with cannabis. And then I started sitting with cannabis more regularly in these ceremonies. And I had this profound experience of all of my experiential knowledge of what it took to unlock my brain from the cages that OCD trapped me in, plus all of my academic knowledge in cognitive psychology, plus all of this philosophical knowledge coming from the Kabbalion and the seven Hermetic principles. I felt cannabis in my subconscious start synthesizing all of these together and how they overlap, and then feeding it from my subconscious into my conscious mind into what has now become the Neuro-Sovereignty Codex, which is a step-by-step roadmap that shows people how to access the Hermetic art of mental transmutation. But in order to access mental transmutation, which is the art where we turn base metals into gold, right? Is how we think of it in terms of alchemy, but the base metals are unfavorable mental states, whether it's anxiety, depression, self-limiting beliefs, unintegrated trauma,
Hmm.
into gold, which is the inner wisdom that comes from understanding and integrating what we are meant to learn by overcoming these rites of passages,
Hmm.
whether it's the trauma or the self-limiting belief, or for me, it was OCD, you name it. And so all of this came forward to paint a step-by-step path that I could walk people through, whatever their base metal is, to begin the process of alchemizing that into gold, into embodied wisdom, finding their 0 point, coming back into their center. Because when we have all of these base metals existing in our field, in our system, then we're being reactive. Our nervous system is dysregulated. We have an anxious or avoidant attachment style. You name it. There are so many base metals that are just waiting to be alchemized
Hmm.
within us. And so that's what the Neuro-Sovereignty Codex really is. It's this center of a Venn diagram of cognitive psychology, hermetic wisdom, meditation, neuroscience, and Christ consciousness is a big part of this codex as well, and how all of these really zero into this center point of bringing people back into harmony
Hmm.
within their mind, within their body, and being able to really connect to their purpose, their divine mission from that space. It's kind of like spring cleaning. We got to get all the bullshit out of the way, all of the systems that aren't
Hmm.
running properly. How can we rectify and bring ourselves back into alignment?
Hmm. Wow. You got all that from smoking reefer.
I sure
Big
did.
time. Man, wow, that is
I
some
sure
stoner stuff right there. Big
did.
time. Yeah. Uh, I mean, what's hilarious about that is like, What is hilarious about that is you really did get it out of smoking reefer, out of like doing marijuana in a ceremonial way, which I think um is a big, we could dig a little bit into that as well. Like, so basically you're using, because marijuana is a plant medicine. There's no doubt it exists. We have cannabinoid receptors in our bodies already. So that tells you
Mhm.
that there is actually a pre-existing relationship between us physiologically and that plant, that we already have a relationship, whether we recognize it or not.
Mhm.
And then, for so many years, people were terrified of it, that plant. And then now people are using it more, but people are so much using it in how do I want to say this, a self-medicating capacity.
A
And
very recreational way.
and also like not frankly a disrespectful way, not
Mm-hmm.
really respecting and appreciating the spirit of this plant or the energy of this plant, however you want to look at that, right? um,
Mm-hmm.
which is, as you say, very motherly and accepting, Santa Maria, in
Santa
so many
Maria,
different cultures.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's really
Exactly.
known as the medicine of Mary, or the great mother, the goddess energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't associate with it that way. We use it to as a salve and to escape rather than to engage, and then when it
Mm-hmm.
creates problems and we get hijacked. Because I think what you're pointing to is, even when you have bad experiences from that medicine is really showing you where it is that you need to focus. So maybe,
Mm-hmm.
I want to get more into the neuro-sovereignty model, because I think that's super fascinating, and what these base metals are for people. But I also want to, ask about like how the ceremony worked, if you're open to discussing it. Like, so you guys, what do you sit around in a circle, you pass around a joint, all right, like a big fucking blunt, all right. You guys are smoking, you playing Bob Marley music, obviously. That's what's going on. And then you just all start coughing. What's the No, but seriously, like, if you don't mind taking us through like a little bit of like how you create that kind of a ceremony, because this is something
Yeah.
people could do at home, you know.
100%. And this is a whole, you could do a whole podcast episode with Lua on this, which I think would be fascinating. I
Yeah,
think people
that's
would
good. We
really,
should smoke some weed together on the
yeah,
podcast.
she would love it. The
All
world
right.
would love it. I would love for the
Okay.
world to have
Good.
access to that knowledge.
California hippies out here.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Um, so in sitting in these ceremonies with Lua, it's opening with prayer, opening with song, calling in the spirit of Santa Maria, Mother Mary, to be with us and really honoring her as an archetype. And so I sat in a couple ceremonies like this with her and then took this knowledge structure back home with me when I was living in Montana.
Hmm.
And so I would just have ceremonies by myself, opening with prayer, singing a song to Mother Mary, calling in the spirit of Mother Mary to be present, and then
Hmm.
really opening myself to be a vessel for the creative energy that wanted to flow through. And I think this is really the difference, what it comes down to with a healthy relationship with the feminine and with cannabis, or an unhealthy relationship with the feminine and cannabis. Because we live in a world where there's so much dysregulation.
Hmm.
There is so much dysregulation. And so, of course, people are going to be reaching for things to regulate themselves.
Hmm.
And unconsciously, so many people are reaching towards cannabis because it's the medicine of the mother. Of
Yeah.
course, when we want to be soothed, we want to be regulated. Of course, we're going to reach for the medicine of the
Hmm.
mother, right? Just as when people are very distracted and having a hard time calming down because they're overstimulated, they want to reach for the medicine of the father, which is tobacco,
Hmm.
right? Without understanding the true relationship of working with this medicine and the blessings that tobacco can bring. But when we're working with cannabis, working with the mother, we're working with the creative energy because the feminine is creative. She's the cycles of death and rebirth itself. And so to work with cannabis and ceremony is learning to listen to the feminine, but this requires us strengthening our own internal masculine principle. And
Hmm.
honestly, that's the entire basis for the Neuro-Sovereignty Codex itself, because the masculine principle outside of us and inside of us is really sick in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And so it's learning how we can heal the masculine, inviting the masculine forward to come into its divine element of greater awareness and patience and respect and understanding. And when we can cultivate this masculine environment inside of ourselves that is able to listen and hold the space, hold the container. This invites the feminine to come forward to create and bring forward these ideas and this creation. And that's exactly what these cannabis ceremonies gifted me,
Hmm.
was I had finally overcome OCD, which is an incredible dysregulation of both masculine and feminine facets of mind. But I
Hmm.
had finally, through meditation, strengthened my masculine principle in my mind, my attention, my awareness, to the point that I could hold myself in the present moment and witness the feminine as she came through and created through me.
Hmm.
And so
So
that's
it's like you kind of watched the rewiring happen because you
it.
were holding on to the tension that you were experiencing with the obsessive compulsive, which by the way, like that's, you're washing your hands constantly, you're using bleach on your shoes before you go to bed or before
Yeah.
you go and walk in your room, right? It's like that, right?
Hmm.
You're
Oh,
totally
yeah.
paranoid.
Totally paranoid. I lived in fight or flight mode every day, washing my hands, sometimes 80 times a day. Like I couldn't move my hands. They'd be like, I'd be falling asleep with them just like rested on my chest, not trying to touch anything because my skin was like so cracked and bleeding, Cloroxing the bottom of my shoes. And before it was hypochondria, I had a form of OCD that was about obsessive compulsive praying. And so I would
Whoa.
be praying in my head for like 4 to 6 hours a day. And so,
Praying what, like praying what? Sorry, but what kind of
so,
prayers?
so this is a whole different domain of my story and conversation, but essentially, the type of OCD I had when it started was called scrupulosity, which is a form of OCD that's based on morality and religion often. And I had a childhood trauma happen when I was about 6 or 7 that left me with this obsessive fear of demonic possession and
Huh.
aliens and ghosts and chupacabras and all the scary things that go bump in the night, right? And being left alone as a little girl with these fears, it I started praying. And so the obsession was fear of demonic possession, and the fear, or the obsession was fear of demonic possession, and the compulsion became praying.
Hmm.
So I became an obsessive compulsive prayer. And so I was always praying from this place of fear, always
Hmm.
praying from this place of fear, like something horrible was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that was the quality and the energy of my prayer for a very, very long time. And
Hmm.
it was based on this hellfire, brimstone concept of God, where God was in the sky outside of me. And I was always in danger. I was always in danger. There was always some alien or ghost or demon that was going to come snatch me around every corner because it was based in this reality structure where God was not, the protection of God was not within me. It
Hmm.
was something outside of me that I had to pray for. But because OCD has so many intrusive thoughts and there's so much shame and guilt, I never felt worthy of those prayers. So I essentially just felt terrorized and fearful and totally unsafe and not protected psychically and also in the physical world for a very long time.
Wow. Crazy.
Mhm.
And so going back to kind of the healing process for you was you were witnessing those thoughts come up and that behavior come up, and then at the same time you were just allowing because so would you break it down as like there was a like an unhealthy masculine component in you that was that was having you have these thoughts, and then the feminine had to come in and sort of like rework its way, or
Totally. So
okay.
this part of my story really encapsulates a big piece of neuro-sovereignty because the seventh Hermetic principle and the principles build on top of each other. So the seventh principle is the final principle. It's like the keystone, right? And it's the principle of gender. It's all about having like the holy grail, the magnum opus is having a full balance of masculine and feminine energy within yourself. That is the energy of being the beloved. That is honestly the energy of Christ consciousness itself is full synergy of the masculine and the feminine components. And so I believe now in my work that a lot of mental illness, most mental illness comes from a breakdown in the relationship of the internal masculine and feminine energies. And
Hmm.
so for me, growing
Yeah.
up in a world where the narrative of God was this white, beneficent, tyrannical, to quote Alan Watts, archetype in the sky that
Uh-huh.
was taking tabs, and there's so much sin and any intrusive thought I had or any time I misspoke, well, it was sinful, and it essentially painted this reality for me as a little kid that was very dangerous, that we're born into a world of sin and Satan's just waiting around any corner to trick you and snatch you. And yeah,
Yeah.
like it's inherently unsafe. And God's just up there in the sky somewhere watching it all happen, but also
Hmm.
keeping tabs and is willing to let us go straight to hell if we if we
Wow.
don't live a life up to his standards, right? And so because that was the concept of God that I knew, and I was also left in a couple situations when I was younger where the masculine didn't show up and protect me. My internal masculine didn't come online as a protector, and it really came online as like a tyrannical leader,
Hmm.
modeled after this organized religion, Christian concept of God that won out over time, right? And so I grew up in a mind where my masculine mind didn't know how to be a protector. And this made my feminine, my subconscious, be so filled with fear and worry and shame and anxiety. And so that was the quality of my mental environment. It was chaotic, it was fearful, it was scary. My mind was a really scary place to live for like 15 years of my
Hmm.
life. And then I found meditation, and meditation gave me the greatest gift in the world. And it was such a struggle at first. Like, at first, I was like, screw meditation. This is awful. Just sitting here being quiet while my mind
It's
is so
hard.
chaotic. Like, this is
Yeah.
horrible.
It's challenging,
It's
especially when
so
you start.
challenging,
Yeah.
right? But I really stuck with it. And what started to happen was I gained enough strength in my awareness and my attention that
Hmm.
when an intrusive thought would come in, I was able to realize that actually that was an intrusive thought. That's not me. I am actually the person that gets to choose how I respond to that. And
Hmm.
that's what the strong masculine mind is able to do. Instead
Right.
of being taken away by all of these thoughts and being the pawns on the chessboard,
Yeah.
it's realizing that you're actually the chess master.
Yeah.
And so
You're the
this
one moving the pawns.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And so the strong masculine mind is the chess master itself. And so I started to strengthen my own masculine principle. And then I found Hermetic Wisdom, which outlined this in an even deeper and profound way for me that helped me realize that there's a lower unconscious plane, the plane of victim consciousness, where we're, like you said earlier, it's like, why is this happening to me? Versus the higher conscious plane, which is the space of the co-creator, where we start to ask, how is this happening for me?
Right.
And I realized I just needed to make a shift. Like, how is OCD happening for me? Oh,
Uh-huh.
this is a rite of passage. I'm meant to overcome this so I can turn around and give other people the roadmap and show them that it's possible. And
Yeah.
it also brought in the Kabbalion is all about the Hermetic wisdom is all about how God is within you and outside of you. As above, so below, as within, so without. We live in the mind of the all, the creator, and mind is meant to create, and we
Hmm.
have mind. There's the infinite mind of the all, and then we have our finite little human minds, but it still gives us access to the most powerful aspect in all of creation. And so this really empowered me with this idea where I started to believe that I could use my mind to rewire. I could use my frontal lobe, my I mind, my masculine mind to rewire my neural circuitry in my brain and also the nervous system of my body and effectively plug my mind and body back into one another because 15 years of OCD living in my head so much, I effectively lived completely disjointed between my mind and my body.
Hmm.
And so it all came down to this balancing of masculine and feminine dynamics, and meditation helped me strengthen my masculine mind enough so that it could become a protector, a listener, a sovereign co-creator of my experience instead of a tyrannical dictator that was just shaming me and guilting me for being dysregulated and having a really hard time.
Hmm.
And it was after I had made that progress that I started to sit with cannabis.
Hmm.
And because my masculine I mind had become strengthened, then she was able to move through me in a more fluid way, bringing this creation of neuro-sovereignty forward, really opening this channel. And I was able to stand aside and witness the synthesis of my life path and overcoming OCD and working on my master's in psychology and all of this hermetic wisdom, feeling her synthesize all of this in my subconscious mind and then bring it forward into my conscious space as a blueprint that I could utilize to walk anybody through to overcome any sort of limitation. Because what happens when we live in a societal construct where the masculine is tyrannical and overcritical and doesn't slow down, doesn't smell the roses, doesn't appreciate the feminine, doesn't listen to the feminine, bulldozes over nature, bulldozes over the needs of the body, then we live in a state of tyranny
Hmm.
outside of ourselves, but also neuro tyranny within ourselves. And so neuro-sovereignty is really the process of working on the masculine to move him from the state of the patriarchal shadow masculine, where he is overcritical and impatient and it's his way or the highway, to the lighter aspect of the masculine, which is patient and forgiving and understanding and protecting, because the masculine picks the direction and provides the protection and also witnesses the feminine. And then in that space of feeling safe and seen and understood by the masculine, the feminine can surrender and start the process of creation.
Hmm.
But for me, my masculine mind was so sick for so long, and he terrorized the feminine inside of me, that she was resentful and distrusting and afraid. And he
Hmm.
was condemning and impatient and really sounded like this inner dictator. Like my inner voice sounded like David Goggins.
Hmm.
Like, do you know David Goggins?
Mm-mm. No.
That's a whole different story, but he's like the alpha male that's like, you wake up in the morning and you look at that version of you in the mirror, and today you're gonna kill that guy. You're gonna tear him down and you're gonna
Oh.
build
Oh
him
yeah.
back up.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, yeah, if I'm going to the gym and I'm gonna have a hard workout, that's a great voice.
Right.
But if I'm just going grocery shopping or going for a walk, that's probably not what I need my internal voice to sound like. But my masculine was so sick that that's what it sounded like for a really long time.
Hmm.
And so in balancing the masculine and feminine energy dynamics within myself, I created myself to essentially be a vessel that could work with cannabis to be able to hold her medicine and her magic as it flowed through me. And that's what really brought neuro-sovereignty forward.
And then so is that something that is that part of the work that you do? Do you use cannabis with your clients and in your initiation type processes, or
I don't.
you don't?
I
Okay, good.
actually don't. I actually
It was
don't. No,
really much
neuro.
more of like like a inspiring kind of a gateway for you to discover what it is that you're doing. But
100%. Yeah, and
Mhm.
I'm very open about talking about the plant medicine pieces of the story, because they're very important parts of the story, and our plant medicine allies have a lot of medicine and wisdom to share with us.
Mhm.
But neuro-sovereignty itself is a plant medicine free process. I kind of call it the manual recoding matrix, because it's a process that teaches you how to use your frontal lobe, how to use your masculine I mind to rewire your neural circuitry and your nervous system.
Hmm. Okay. All right,
Mhm.
great. Well, that sounds good. How do we do that? Oh, and wouldn't you like to know? Not today, friends. Ha ha! Cliffhanger ending. Okay. Gotta wait until next week. Why? Because I'm trying new stuff this year, okay? And one of them is to have cliffhanger endings. So, next week, okay, you're gonna have total and complete enlightenment, have all of your problems solved, and be one with the universe. Or you'll just find out what else Jade Michael has to say. I promise it's good. She's gonna get into how to use your frontal lobes to rewire your whole shenanigan, man. You know what I mean? Big time frontal lobe rewiring. All right, you guys, the whole all lobes, all your frontal lobes are going to be completely rewired. Your reticular activating system is going to come online, man, and it's going to seek and find lions everywhere. You know what I mean? Or tigers, or I don't know, bears, something like that. But like probably not real ones. You know what I mean? Probably like fake stuffed ones or painted ones or whatever. I don't know, man. Animal, your choice. All right, some shit's gonna go down. It's gonna be cool. Your loads are gonna be activated. All right, and it's gonna be all on point. Good deal. See you guys next week. Cheers.